All right, so for the third part of this way too long video for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead Act 2, we picked up on page 35 for you guys. And we've got Claudius and Gertrude and all them coming on stage. And guys, I think we can, there's still in my book another 20 pages. So I still haven't, I've only done half of what we're supposed to at this point, but I'm going to skip through and kind of bulldoze this part, okay? So they come on stage, and this is the whole part where Gertrude and Claudius are asking for a report on Hamlet. I really don't mark much of the Hamlet scene because we've already discussed that. So moving on, let's pick up with when the players come back. Yeah, let's do that. So for you guys, that's going to be, let's find it. Page 37. So we're going to get another 2 pages in, all right? So the player comes back and he says, excuse me. Gosh, guys, I'm sorry. I'm losing my voice. I told you guys earlier when we did the very first part about looking at the stage directions. And one of the important things that comes up on page 37, I believe. Yeah, it says Rosencrantz, let's go, spins around. He has been holding Alfred in his robe and blonde wig. The player is in the downstage corner still. Rosencrantz comes down to that exit. The player does not budge. He and Rosencrantz stand toe to toe. You get this idea that Rosencrantz is stuck inside their play. And again, that's kind of a key thing about how sometimes we get stuck inside the. Okay, wow. Just got an email from one of you who's finishing up the questions from yesterday. So cool. So like the idea that we're stuck inside other people's lives at times and we're a bit player in their drama. So that's kind of what we're dealing with here. Okay. The player points out something cool. They're talking about dress rehearsal here. He says, we always use the same costumes more or less, and they forget what they are supposed to be in, you see, some of the actors. You know, sometimes how we get so wrapped up in a role, we kind of forget to alter it as needs be. And I think that happens. I think we see this with a lot of people who, you see things like big businessmen. People are like, why are they like this? Why can't they be more caring or more empathetic and things like that? And I think for them to become the success they are, they have to, mortgage some of their better qualities to be able to do this. And then at some point they get so used to putting on that hard, charging businessman role that when they get home, they forget to take it off. Or that, once they don't know when to stop. You've hit the peak. You're making billions. Now let's do something else. Not everyone can be a Bill Gates, who I do look up to as a person who, despite, having tons of money, he seems to have realized the responsibility he has too. So I think that's kind of what they're talking about here. And then there's a really cool line the player points out, talks about death on stage particularly. He says it what brings out the poetry in them. And you think about one of the ways you can really determine how good an actor is how they carry out a death scene, especially in the theater. We've watched some plays, in class, and we've seen some really bad death scenes. And he says death brings out the poetry in them. He doesn't just mean on stage. Literally, death brings out the poetry in so many people. Think about at a funeral and stuff, the way people, when they deliver eulogies, how a person who's not that eloquent stands up there and says, actually gets their emotions out, and how beautiful it often sounds. And then the player points out there's nothing more unconvincing than an unconvincing death, which I love that line. And again, he's making fun of the theater deaths. But in real life, think about that, a life that's been lived that has no purpose, and then you die a meaningless death. It's kind of a letdown, Now, I'm not saying that's what we all do. Obviously, it's not. But, that's what we want to avoid. Obviously, we don't want to be people who live a meaningless life and die a pointless death. It says we are tied to a language which makes up in obscurity what it lacks in style. Now, I'm telling you right now, as an English teacher, I love that line. This is the player talking. He says we are tied down to a language which makes up in obscurity what it lacks in style. I'm saying our language lacks style, which it definitely does. It makes up for that by the words being obscure and the meaning being obscure. Think about how many times we say things to each other and you hear it and you're like, what did they mean by this? I do this constantly anytime Mr. Sandiford or Miss Richardson has to come talk to me about something. I'm constantly overanalyzing it because there's so much obscurity in the language. Like what did they mean by that? Did they actually mean this? is this going on? We start overreading things, and that's kind of what he's pointing out. All right. Um, at this point, they're doing the practicing for the dumb show they're going to put on for Hamlet. You remember that from the play? That's what we're dealing with here. We also see, it looks like, a little bit of an interaction between between Ophelia and Hamlet, maybe. I think that's what's going on here. I'm trying to find another good spot here for us. What do we want? I'm trying to make sure I don't drag on too much with you guys today. I've already done it way too much. Okay, let's find it over here. The player starts talking about fate in a minute, and that's kind of key. There's a lot here you can go through. I'm trying to leave a little bit of mystery for you and not so much for me. Skipped a lot on yours. Let's see. Guys, I apologize for not having this as annotated as I did the last time. I just felt like there's no way to do this cleanly. All right, well, I can't find it on yours. But anyway, there's a part where the player says he switches off his smile. Now, what we're talking about here is, let me back up actually a bit. The player says, between just desserts and tragic irony, we are given quite a lot of scope for our particular talent. And then he says, generally speaking, things have gotten about as far as they can possibly go when things have gotten about as bad as they reasonably can get, which is a very cool line. And Guildenstern says, who decides? And by the words, he says, who decides it's gotten as bad as it can get? And this is really cool. The player, it says, switching off his smile, decides, it is written. So when Guildenstern asks who decides how bad it's going to get and what's the end, the player stops, he quits smiling, which means he's broken character here. And he says, it's not something that's decided. It's written. It's fate. All right. And this is where now you got to think for an actor. By this, he means it's written in the script. He says, we know what's going to happen because it's here for us in the script. In life, we don't have that. But you still have this concept of fate. You may not have the script in front of you, but there is a script. And we know what's coming. And that's kind of the point he's making there. All right. It's just the bad end unhappily, the good unluckily. That is what tragedy means. I love that. His definition, he just says that life is basically a tragedy, what we're living through. And he says that the bad end unhappily and the good unluckily. And that's just what it is. He says, good or bad, we both don't end happily. And that's pretty sad, I know. That's pretty pessimistic for sure. I didn't write this, okay? Rosencrantz gets a little upset. He says, I want a good story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And, don't we all? Don't we all? That's what we want. We want our life to just have the beginning, a really strong, good middle section, and then, a strong ending. And that's all it is. That's all we want. And it doesn't go that way for most people. Guildenstern says, I'd prefer art to mirror life if it's all the same to you. He's talking to the player there. He's like, this is what I would like. Because I would like art to be like what really happens. And I don't think he really does, to be honest with you. All right, then the player goes through and shows that. Now, this is where we catch up with the text I've got over here, page 41. We're at where something weird happens. And this is going to take a bigger role in Act 3 when we get to it. We have these two spies show up, two guys that are in cloaks. You can't see who they are. And it starts on, let's see where they show up for you guys. May actually be on page 40 for you. I think that the text I have and the text you guys have aren't exactly the same. The part I just read is actually the top of page 40. The part we're getting into now where the spies show up is going to be a little later. I'm just going to read it to you. It's hard to find it in this PDF. I really wish we had books and we could just do it easier. So what brings Rosencrantz forward is the fact that under their cloaks, the two spies are wearing coats identical to those worn by Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, whose coats are now covered by their cloaks. Rosencrantz approaches his spy doubtfully. He does not quite understand why the coats are familiar. Rosencrantz stands close, touches the coat, and thoughtfully. Now, this is kind of neat. These two spies appear and they're in cloaks, and then all of a sudden they notice that underneath the cloaks are the same clothes they're wearing, and then all of a sudden they're wearing the cloaks. So yeah, the spies are they're Rosencrantz and Guildenstern again. Really weird, absurdist interaction with they're kind of two of them each on stage. All right, but this is where we're starting to get to the end of their part in the Hamlet play, because you do see talking about giving them a letter to present to the English court. So we know now that they have been given this summons that is supposed to be to indicate Hamlet's death. So these two spies represent something else. All right. Okay, going on. Oh yeah, I love this. Let's find it for you. It is on. What's going on here is they're basically seeing this acted out in front of them handing over the letter and stuff like that. This is kind of cool. It says the two spies awaiting execution at the hands of the player who takes his dagger out of his belt. So we're getting the dumb show that they're doing on stage is actually Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's death. They're getting to see it ahead of time. And it says audiences know what to expect, and that is all they are prepared to believe in. And that is that's the player talking. I love that statement when he says that. This is going on. This is right before they're about to be killed. And when he says audiences know what to expect, and that's all they're prepared to believe in, that again applies to so much more than the theater. Of course, that happens in the theater. You know what's expected, and that you'll believe that, and you'll believe all sorts of nonsense on stage, but as long as it's within the bounds of what's expected. But we do that in life too. You know, we expect certain people to behave a certain way, and when they behave a certain way, we're like, that's exactly what I thought. But when things don't work out the way we thought, we tend to make up excuses as to why that's not the case. Again, I know I typically go to things like politics, but it's really easy to see in that. You know, if you're a fan of the president, for example, you expect certain things to happen, and you'll focus on those things. And if anything comes up to throw that off, you're just going to not believe it and just say it doesn't exist. Now, that works. Doesn't matter whether it's President Trump now or President Obama 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago. It was the same thing then. It was just shoe was on the other foot. All right. But when you're on the outside looking in and see people behaving that way, it's hilarious, because we really look totally ridiculous. We really do when we're that way, because it's like our whole belief system is not based on what's happening, but what we expect to happen. And I think that's kind of the key element in that. So Guildenstern says, no, you got it all wrong. You can't act death. The fact of it is, it's got nothing to do with seeing it happen. It's not gasps and blood and falling about. That isn't what makes it death. It's just a man failing to reappear. That's all. Now you see him, now you don't. That's the only thing that's real. Here 1 minute, gone the next, and never coming back. An exit, unobtrusive and unannounced, a disappearance, gathering weight as it goes on until finally it is heavy with death. Really poetic. I mean, I love Guildenstern's thing is that death isn't all of this flailing about and, drama and, thundering drums. It's just you're there and then you're not, is what he's saying. He's really wrestling with death as he's having to see his own death acted out. Now, at this point, as he's having that outburst, you get the lights, and if you go there again, referencing the Hamlet play, where the king flips out when he sees, his murder, not his literal murder, but the murder he committed acted out. So now everything's popping back on. It says the stage is empty, save for two cloaked figures sprawled on the ground in the approximate positions last held by the dead spies. As the light grows, they are seen to be Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So we saw the two spies get killed on stage. They say lights, lights, light. There's a lot of chaos. And when the lights come back up, literally on stage, everything's cleared off, except you see two cloaked figures lying on the ground where the two spies had died. So at first glance, it looks like you're seeing the tail end of the little dumb show where the two spies were murdered. But the irony is when the two characters stand up, it's Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the actual two. All right. And then we're back to them discussing things about, east and west and direction. Because again, they're lacking direction. Guildenstern has a great line. He says, "Good God, I hope more tears are shed for us." And he's talking about, barely anyone cared about these two people dying in the play. He says, "I hope more people care about us." And you've read the play. You know that there's no tears shed for them. Their death scene is contained in a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead statement from a play, from a letter, which is, there's your title. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, is the tears shed for them. And there's none. No one cares that they're gone. And that's depressing. All right. There's a lot left at the tail end of this, and I highlighted very little because it's just not that important. let's see if we can catch the last little bit. If we get towards the end of Act 2, we have a couple of things that pop up to set up Act 3. All right. Guildenstern says, "Can that be all? And why us? Anybody would have done, and we have contributed nothing." And he's talking about as he's getting close to death. And I'm going to keep scrolling and looking for this as I'm telling you this. But Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are facing the concept that they're thinking about the end of their life. And he and is it Rosencrantz or Guildenstern? It's got to be Guildenstern. Yeah, Guildenstern points out, but is this it? I think this is a concept that a lot of us run into as we approach the end of something. Think about you guys as you approach the end of high school. You know, is this it? Is this all there was? You start having the regrets. Here are all the things that I should have done, but I didn't. You know, what now? And that's just normal to go through. I mean, a lot of people are given the opportunity, you know, to be told things like, hey, you've got a month left to live or a year left to live. And you can start thinking these thoughts. A lot of us, it's in the split second before we die, you know, in the car wreck or whatever. But the idea of I didn't make a big enough impact is not unheard of. And the thing is that if we look at the play Hamlet, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern made no impact. They were not important characters. I mean, I think that's really what Stoppard's working with. And I mentioned this in the very first video. You can take those two out of the play and make it shorter. In fact, Hamlet, for as long as it is, removing those two characters makes perfect sense because the play is too long in many ways. And to remove them would make this a better, a more palatable time frame for the play. But they can't, and they're still in there. But if you were to realize that about yourself in life, and to say that if I never existed, nothing would be different, that's just such a tragic thought. For me, it's what makes summer so difficult. I you know, on June 1st or whenever, May the 25th or whatever it is that the year ends, until the day we go back to school, I keep thinking if I was to be a bear and hibernate for this 2 months, nothing would change about my life. Nothing. Literally, I've had no impact on life. My days pretty much go the same during the summer. I get up, and I get up at a reasonable time. I'm not a late sleeper. I get up, I sit down, at least the first part of the summer, I try to do school prep stuff, but I end up staring at a TV for 2 hours and typing a page maybe. I'll go outside. You know, we don't have the blessing of having an actual pool. Part of it because we can't afford it. But second of all, because of the way my house is on this giant incline. So we'll have, every year, we'll buy like one or two because we'll go through them, you know, of the inflatable like pools. And we'll sit it out there. And I will sit out there and listen to music. And for the little bit of sunlight I have in my backyard. And, you know, maybe read a book and do nothing. And then come inside and just sit on a couch. And then Mitzi comes home, and I feel like a complete waste of space. I mean, I go through literal depression during those time periods. And I can understand exactly where Rosencrantz is at this point. Can that be it? We've contributed nothing. And that hurts people. We want to feel like we've contributed something. And then we get close to the ending. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are talking to each other, and Rosencrantz says, he said we can go, cross my heart. Guildenstern says, I like to know where I am. Even if I don't know where I am, I like to know that. If we go, there's no knowing. It's like Guildenstern is scared to go on finish this journey because he's like, I don't know where it's going to be. And, you know, the uncertainty is killing him. And, of course, we know what's happening, what's going to happen to them at the end. He says, no knowing what? Well, if we'll ever come back. We don't want to come back. Notice the confusion here. Rosencrantz says we don't want to come back here, and Guildenstern doesn't mean that. He means, you know, are we ever going to be at this place in our lives again? You know, moving to the next stage is scary for you guys. You know, think about it. Moving to college is scary because, you know, all the certainty and what you've had for 12 years of your life is gone, and you can't come back. Now, you know, you can come back and visit. Mr. Morse would love to see you, but beyond that, you know, there's no going to be back at this stage of your life. And that's scaring Guildenstern right now. Guildenstern says, that may be well and true, but where do we want to go? Rosencrantz says, we'll be free. Guildenstern says, I don't know. It's the same sky. Rosencrantz says, well, we've come this far, and besides, anything could happen yet. You know, I love Rosencrantz's rosy view of things. He's like, hey, man, look, we're going to go finish this journey out. We're going to deliver this letter or whatever it is we're supposed to do. And then we're going to be free and we can have our own life. And Guildenstern points out, you know, it's the same sky. You know, in other words, the situation's the same. You know, freedom's great if you have the resources to be free. But if you don't, what does that mean? And he says, you know, I fear what's coming. And Rosencrantz has the beautiful idea of, hey man, something great might happen for us. We know they're going to die. Not something great. All right. So we see Guildenstern's fears being realized in Act 3 as it comes on. So that's going to end this. There were 60 something minutes of Act 2, and I apologize to you guys. I realize these are terrible videos. They really are, because it's all over the place. But guys, that's kind of in line with these plays. They're all over the place. All right. And we really need a classroom and we need discussion to get through these. And all I'm going to get is me rambling, you doing some reading, and then you answering some questions. And in all honesty, we had to fill 2 weeks. And I wanted to fill it with something that I thought could at least maybe give a couple of you something to think about. Same thing we did with Metamorphosis. I just wanted you guys to have some thoughts to think about as you move on to the next stages of your life. And some of this may be buried in your psyche, and you may never think about it for another 10, 15 years. But I would like, hopefully, one day you're cleaning something up and, you don't have the book, but maybe you go back and buy it. And let's pretend that we did this in class. And you come across this book and you're like, I remember talking about that in class. And you kind of flip through it and you just happen to find one of the things you highlight. And it makes you think about, because there's a lot to think about here. There's a lot of this existential dread that Guildenstern and Rosencrantz briefly face that is going to happen. It happens at different stages in our lives. Some of you have dealt with it in the last few months. Some of you, as you get into college, you'll deal with it. College may not be what you expected, and it may be harder than you expected, and you may struggle with that, and you may struggle with changing your major and going through all these other things, and you don't really know what to do next. And that's kind of what we're getting in this book. And, to be honest with you, the book doesn't give you a great view of it. And as we finish it next week, we'll definitely talk more about, when you find ourselves in that situation, what we should do, because I have a different opinion than Tom Stopper does. And that's okay. I appreciate what he has to say, but, I'm not as pessimistic as he is about life. All right. So that finishes up Act 2. And again, apologies to you guys. I know you're probably thinking about this like, God, Mr. Morse is a terrible teacher. And I really, this is just a horrible way to do this, but I don't feel like I'm doing my due diligence if I don't deliver a message this way, at least so that you can kind of have interaction with me as we go through this. So, I hope you guys have a great ending of the week. Good luck on the questions. If you have any questions, please let me know. I would love to interact with you beyond just me rambling in a video for 60 minutes, okay? So, all right, well, take care. Good luck, and we'll see you back next week for the final week of our time together, sadly. All right, I miss you guys. I hope you guys are having a great week.